So you guys will need to just accept that the recording is cool. And Kim, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you everyone for joining us. Oh, and if you have questions, just throw them in the chat.
Thank you, Christy. I am absolutely thrilled to be here, and thank you to the Russell Library for hosting this program. Very, very excited about it. So we're going to be talking about composting tonight, and I appreciate you taking the time to come here. And let's see if I can, there we go. So let's start. Just to tell you a little bit about me, this is a slide about me. I am the recycling coordinator for the city of Middletown. I have been here for 30 years. I don't know where the time has gone, but I absolutely love my job. I'm very passionate about all things environmental, but especially waste issues and composting issues, waste reduction, recycling, refilling, all anything waste related. We're trying to get people to reduce their waste in Connecticut, and we'll talk a little bit about that. I've organized many different programs in the city over the years. I actually live in Cromwell. I have 3 girls who are young adults now, very proud of them. They were Irish step dancers when they were young. I still do a little bit of dancing now. And I compost myself and have for over 30 years. And just last year, I actually took the UConn Master Composting program. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But so that's just an introduction to me. So the UConn Master Composter program, I do want to mention this because it is an absolutely fabulous program. It is a program run out of UConn, and it's basically a train the trainer program. So if you're interested in composting, of course, but and you want to spread the word, this is a great program. And even if you just want to learn more, it's a 6-week program. It explores the basics of composting, the chemistry, recipes and calculators, all about earthworms, beneficial ones and harmful ones, vermicomposting, composting structures. And we'll talk a little bit about this today, but this program goes into it much more depth. And they usually offer a couple field trips, and they also require 20 hours of community service to graduate. And then the hopes that the people who go through that program, like myself, will then continue to educate people throughout the community. And last summer, we had a table at our farmers market, and the UConn Master Composters, they came and staffed that table and talked to people all summer long about composting. And every single one of them was amazing and magnificent. So it's really just a wonderful program. I can't speak highly enough of it. So today, this is what we're going to talk about. What is compost? Why composting is important? The different systems of composting and how to divert food waste, the different elements, recipes for compost, how to use your compost, and then what are the other resources that we have out there. And please, if you have questions as I'm speaking, please put them in the chat, and then I'm going to take a break a little bit of the way through, answer any questions that are up there, and then at the end, we'll certainly have time for more questions. So what is compost? So composting is the controlled decomposition of organic materials. It makes an earthy, dark, crumbly substance. And if we were in person, as we usually do this program, I would have some with me and you'd be able to touch it and feel it. It is not soil, it's a soil amendment. And it is, natural decomposition happens in nature, but this is more of a controlled process to speed up the process, perhaps. It makes it happen quicker. So it's a biological process, a fair amount of science involved, but it also can be as easy or as difficult as you want to make it. It's an aerobic process. So that means that it absolutely needs oxygen to happen. And there's different temperature stages throughout the composting process, and we'll talk about those. And that sometimes those stages are not always reached. And I can say with my compost, it's fairly, I'm a very simple composter, and I don't always reach that hot compost level, and that's fine. It still happens. So the most important thing about compost are the microorganisms. It's a living soil. And the whole controlling the process is you want to keep the bugs happy. So just like plants, just like pets, you want to keep your bugs in your compost happy. So the microorganisms do the work, and they convert the feedstock materials, what you put into your compost, into the soil amendment. So that's kind of a brief explanation. Now there's lots of reasons to compost. Why do we want to compost? First, it's good for the environment. It reduces waste. And I apologize, that is my dog. I closed all the windows hoping she would not bark. It reduces waste going to landfills and incinerators. And it's certainly a better way to manage the waste. 35% of what we throw away is organic and can be composted. So that's a lot of material that we can keep out of traditional solid waste facilities. It also saves energy, reduces pollution, reduces greenhouse gas emissions. It holds carbon in the soil, and it can act as a carbon sink. So composting is a great way to combat climate change and protect our soil. Now it also reduces waste and saves money. So by reducing trash, you can perhaps reduce your trash bill, and you also have less of a need for synthetic fertilizers and pesticides. I am so sorry. And you can make your own compost instead of buying it. So that certainly saves money. And then it reduces climate change. We talked about that. And then one of the biggest reasons to compost is your soil health. It improves the soil structure, aerates the soil, creates better drainage, adds biodiversity, adds organic nutrients to the soil, which become available to the plants over time. It's like a natural slow release of the nutrients. And it helps the plants resist disease, prevents erosion. There's so many good reasons that compost can help your soil. Balances the pH, attracts worms. And I would say probably, I mean, I'm all about waste, but that's why I started composting 30 years ago. But a lot of gardeners, I don't know if we have a lot of gardeners on this program today, but making your own compost can certainly help your plants. And I know a lot of people who do it for that reason as well. So I want to spend a couple minutes talking about waste. We do have a trash problem in Connecticut, and actually all of New England. You might have seen some articles on it. It's amazing to think how much trash we generate today compared to, 30, 40, 50 years ago. In 1960, each person generated about 2.5 pounds of trash a day. And now, and actually in 2018, we were generating about 4.5 pounds of trash today, and another pound for recyclables. So it's just that our culture has changed, our lives have changed. There's items that have come into our life that didn't exist before, and they create a lot of waste. So, and waste has all kinds of problems associated with it. There's environmental issues like air pollution, water pollution, space issues. In Connecticut, we really don't have space to site another landfill or any kind of trash facility, really. Wildlife and marine issues. There's a lot of discussion about plastic pollution in our ocean and on our land. Environmental justice issues. Facilities are usually sited in poorer communities, and they impact the health of the people living there. So in Connecticut and New England, we're running out of space for trash. So therefore, our waste is getting shipped out of state, and it's getting harder and harder to just manage it in state. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit in the next slide. Recycling is definitely a better way, a better disposal option, but it's not the answer. Recycling, and I'm a recycling coordinator, but recycling is not the answer. There's issues with recycling as well. And that's another presentation, I guess. But so according to a 2015 waste composition study, about 900,000 tons of organic materials were still in our waste stream. And that includes food waste, yard debris, leaves, grass clippings, and compostable paper. So waste reduction is a big part of the solution, but composting is vital to managing this problem. Now in Connecticut, one of the largest trash incinerators is set to close. Now it seems like it maybe in a year, it's a little within a year, definitely. Over 50 communities have brought their waste of over 500,000 tons of waste there. And now they need to find another place to bring that waste. And what's happening is a lot of that waste is going to be going out of state. And that puts us at the mercy of other states. It will definitely increase costs. So one way to manage that is to reduce our waste. And the State Department of Environmental and State Department of Energy and Environmental Protection has been working with communities to try to come up with different ways to reduce waste. And hopefully you'll see some of these programs coming to fruition in the next year or so. But just keep that in mind. If waste is going to be shipped out of state, trash costs are going to rise. And environmental costs as well. So this is the solid waste hierarchy that so on the left, source reduction, recycling, composting, energy recovery, landfill, and incineration. So this is kind of the hierarchy that the state follows to dispose of waste. We should be looking at source reduction first. And I will say I've done this, I've been doing this work for a long time, and it's really only recently that we're looking at that seriously and putting money into it to develop programs to reduce waste. And then recycling, which we spend a lot of time on, and then composting. And after that, you get the energy recovery, like the anaerobic digestion and the landfill incineration. Now, there's also a similar hierarchy for organics, and that is source reduction. So that means planning your meals. Only make food for the people who are going to be eating it. Have an eat first bin in your refrigerator so that food doesn't rot, that sort of thing. And then extra food, try to feed it to hungry people, donate it to the soup kitchen or those type of places, and then feed animals food. So feed people first, then feed animals, and then go to anaerobic digestion, composting, landfill, and incineration. So there's a hierarchy for both. Now, there's many different ways to divert and compost food scraps, and I'm going to focus on food scraps, but we'll be talking about all organics, including yard debris as well. So backyard composting, that's what we're going to focus on tonight. There's also vermicomposting with, which is composting with worms, which I did do for over 10 years on a municipal level. We had a greenhouse and we did have worms that we composted food with, and we had educational programs with. Unfortunately, that is not operating now, but I do have some experience with that. And then community composting, trying to do it on a larger scale, on-farm composting, municipal drop-offs, which we'll talk about a little bit because we have some in Middletown, and other towns are starting to have those as well. And then curbside collection. So if you can't compost in your backyard, which is really the best thing to do because you don't have the transportation costs then, and you develop your own compost. But some communities, and we in Middletown actually just applied for a grant to do some curbside collection of residential food scraps and larger composting facilities, anaerobic digestion. So there's a lot to it, believe it or not. So to Middletown's, I just want to mention Middletown's Feed the Earth program, our food diversion efforts. So I'm all about choices. I think not everybody is able to have a backyard compost, so we want to have options for everyone. We're doing a program where we're collecting food scraps from restaurants. It's called Feed the Earth. We're working with Blue Earth Compost on that, and we have over 40 restaurants participating now. However, so those food scraps go to the anaerobic digester, and there they get turned into clean energy, and you do have a compost after that as well, but it's not like backyard composting. We have a couple of drop-offs in town where people who can't compost in their backyard, they can bring their food scraps to one of these 2 drop-offs, and then it gets picked up by Blue Earth Compost. We are giving away these kits, which you see on the bottom. We have a small kitchen food scrap collector, and then a medium-sized one to transport it in, and then it gets dumped into the bigger container. So those we offer free to Middletown residents. They have to sign a commitment pledge that they're going to participate in the program, but those are available. And then we do community compost sales. That's happening now for compost bins and ray barrels. And then, as I mentioned, we just applied for a grant. I don't know if we're going to get it or not, but it would commence a co-collection program where your food scraps would go in a separate bag, and they could go in your trash container, and then they go to a facility where they're separated out for anaerobic digestion. So that's kind of a program to try to get the masses to do it, try to get more people to separate out their food scraps. Because if we can divert all our food scraps, we wouldn't need additional trash facilities in the state. So it wouldn't make a difference. But today we're going to talk about backyard composting. This is to me, this is the fun way to do it. And there are different ways to do it. So let's get right into it. So things to think about when you're considering setting up a backyard compost. These are the 4 things that I think are most important. Space, what kind of yard do you have? How much space do you have? And that might determine what kind of bin you get or how you develop your system. And then goals, what do you want to get out of the compost? Are you a gardener? Do you want the compost as a soil amendment for your garden? Or are you doing it just to reduce trash and have a little bit of compost? You know, what are your specific goals? And then time. We all know time and energy are really important, right? So what kind of time do you have? And that might determine what kind of system you set up. And then lastly, how much energy you have. I, as I mentioned, am a very lazy composter, and I probably always have been a lazy composter. So I do it with the least amount of time and the least amount of energy, and it works just fine for me. So first, I'm going to talk about the bins, the outdoor bins. There's lots of different choices for the bins. This one is a pre-made plastic bin. They're often made out of recycled plastic, and you usually harvest the compost from the bottom. There's a door on the bottom where you can take the compost out. There's no heavy lifting. You can, if you want, and a lot of people do this, you can actually lift when you're ready, when you're done, you can lift the whole bin up and move it to a different location. We have 2 of these at City Hall. They're outside in our little garden in the back of the building, and they've worked perfectly fine there. They're pretty easy to set up. You can set it up in less than half an hour. It's enclosed. So these are good if you have animal problems or if you're concerned about animals. They usually work pretty well to keep animals out, although I will say that nothing is totally foolproof, animal proof, but they're pretty close to it. You might want to I did have a problem at City Hall with an animal digging underneath it. So you could put like a hardware cloth on the bottom of it, or they do make rodent screens that you can put on the bottom, because you're setting it right on the ground, because and you want to set it right on the ground so that the microorganisms can go up and down. But you could put a screen on the bottom so that you don't have like an opossum or, you know, anything else digging up underneath it. It is tidy and it looks nice in your yard if your neighbors are concerned about that. It does work best if you have two. And like I said, I have two at City Hall that we use. And that way you have one in use. And then when that's full, you can let that one set and put your material in the second one. I find that's a pretty good system for me. There is not, I guess the downside of this type of bin is there's not a lot of aeration. So you are going to want to, and we'll talk about these elements later too. You're going to want to aerate it yourself, meaning you want to get an oxygen flow through it. So you're going to want to use a pitchfork or an aerator, and they're pretty easy to use and they're kind of fun to use too. And we'll talk about those as well. These we do sell. The municipality in our region do sell these. We do have a sale going on now that I'll mention at the end. So the next one is an open pile compost bin. Now these bins are pretty easy to use. However, I wouldn't really recommend. I would recommend them for just yard debris. If you're going to add food scraps, I would not recommend them because they are really open and animals can get in them. And I actually was just listening to a webinar from the folks in Vermont, and there is some concern about animals, like domestic animals, like dogs getting at them, because sometimes the food can have harmful bacteria to them. So if you're just doing yard debris, like leaves or wood chips, that sort of thing, it'll take longer to compost, but you could use a pile like this. So these have 3 sides around it. They're easy to turn. There's lots of aeration. That's not a problem at all. It is a little harder to get it to heat up, but that's not a big deal. But like I said, it can be more likely to attract animals, so probably not so great for urban and suburban settings. Ideally, you want these 3 feet by 3 feet to 5 feet by 5 feet, no bigger than that, and that's for adequate airflow and heating up. Now these are wire bins or pallet bins, and these are low cost, low budget. It's a great way to repurpose the wooden bins. Again, well, I would say the wire bins are best for yard trimmings. If you're in an urban area, the pallet bins you could make for both. You might want to put hardware cloth around the sides of it and have a cover on it so it doesn't attract critters. But these are really low cost, easy bins to make. And actually you could have something like this to hold your leaves next to your other type of bin where you are composting food scraps. And I'll talk about why in a little bit, but that's those. Let's see, can we get to the next one? Now these are a 2 or 3 bin system, which are great for big gardens. If you have time and space. These require a little more space and a little more time to manage. But it is easy to turn the material, and there's actually a system to it. So you do want to make sure, so there's 3 bins, and you could make these with pallets as well. You really want the hardware cloth around it to keep critters out. A 3-bin system, I will say, is kind of, it is big for a family. You really don't need one that size for a family. Maybe a 2-bin system would work, would be good for just a family. But if you're talking about multiple families, a 3-bin system would work, or a bigger, a bigger place. So you usually there's a board in the front that can slide out so you can easily move the material, and you can use one of the bins to store your leaves in, and then the second bin you can add your material in. I guess if you have a third bin, then you can shift it over to that bin as it composts. So there's kind of a system to it, and they're kind of fun. But again, they do require more time. They do require more energy. And the size is a little big for a typical single family. Schools have also used these. There's lots of, there are kits you can buy for these, or there's a lot of do-it-yourself instructions on the internet for these.
Kim, can I interrupt and just say, what is the hardware cloth? There's a question about that, and since that's on the screen.
Ah, good question. So that is like, it is similar to chicken wire, but smaller holes than chicken wire. So it's a stiff kind of wiry material that you can line the bins with, or put it on the bottom. So I guess if you think of chicken wire, just think of it with smaller holes. It's a stiffer material than chicken wire. It'll stand as a flat piece. So that's what that is. Does that explain that? Hopefully.
That's good.
Okay. Are there any other questions? We could.
Also, if the top is open of the compost bin and rain comes in all the time, is that okay?
That's a good question. That's an excellent question. So it depends. You could keep your top open, because that actually will give you water, which you may need, but you don't want your bin to get too wet. And that's one of the things, we're going to talk about that in a little bit, with the elements that are necessary for composting. So you can have it open top, you can have the rain get in, but you want to keep an eye on the moisture of the bin. And if it does get too wet, you're going to want to cover it with a tarp, just to so it doesn't get too moist.
Excellent.
But you definitely can have a compost bin without a cover on it. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So the last, I think this is the last type of bin, a tumbler. So a lot of people ask me about tumblers because they look nice and they seem easier. And I'm not sure if that's the case. It probably depends on what kind of tumbler you get. But they're good for small spaces. They are all enclosed. And some of them turn with a handle. Some of them, like that, the tube one on the right, that one you just physically have to turn or spin, I guess. And it can get hard. When you have a lot of stuff in there, it can be hard to spin that. So I know a lot of people think the tumblers are fabulous. Honestly, I have never used one. I have seen them and worked with them, but it totally depends on the type of tumbler that you get. Now, the one on the left is a Jura tumbler, and they're supposed to be like one of the best ones and fairly easy to use. They have 2 chambers, so you can use that concept of working in a chamber, then letting it set, and then going to the second chamber when the other one is full. They're expensive though. They are costly, and they're usually smaller. Like they have a smaller space to work with. But you could also work with have a system of using a tumbler and then using that with another type of bin system. So just be careful with what type of tumbler you get if you're going to get a tumbler. Read the reviews. I guess that's my one of my pieces of advice. Read the reviews and see what people say about Okay, there you can also make your own tumbler. There are also do-it-yourself instructions on the internet for tumblers. And the nice thing about them is that everything is all contained. So if you are concerned about animals, they are all it is all contained in there, and you're very unlikely to have any animal problems. Now, I'm happy to say that we are going to be having a compost garden, a compost bin garden at Reboot Eco in Middletown, coming probably early summer. So we're going to have different types of bins on display with information, because sometimes you just want to see it, right? And get an idea of what it is. So I'm really excited about this. I'm actually shocked that we haven't thought of doing it before, but this is going to be a great place just to come in, see what the bins are like. And actually, I am going to be looking for people to help me manage this garden. So it'll be a place where we'll have certain families working with us and bringing their food scraps in and keeping the bins running. So if anybody's interested in that, contact me. I think it'll be kind of fun. And it's by one of my favorite places, Reboot Eco, which is a new zero waste refill store in Middletown. If you haven't been there, I highly recommend it. Very excited to have that in Middletown. So next I want to talk about the what you need in the kitchen. So sometimes people get they have, you know, they have their bin outside, but then they're like, how am I going to do this in my kitchen? You know, I need another garbage pail to collect the food scraps. And maybe that's not the case for this group, so I'll just go over this quickly. But it is important that you have a system to collect your food scraps in your kitchen. And it's very unique to you, whatever works for you. There's lots of different pails out there. Like I said, the city is giving away the plastic 3-gallon kitchen scrap containers, but you know, there's really nice ceramic ones, stainless steel ones. There's the plastic ones, bamboo ones. For many years, I just used yogurt containers. The larger yogurt containers, I use those at work and at home. And then some people will also collect it and store it in the freezer until, I guess if you have a home compost, you don't really need to do that, but they didn't want it sitting out. So they would keep it in the fridge or the freezer and then empty it from there. So there's lots of different ways to do it in your kitchen. And I'm happy if anybody is struggling with that, please contact me. I'd be happy to just brainstorm ways to do it. But I mean, some of the containers are absolutely beautiful, and you could have them out on your counter with no problem at all. Okay, that's just some other ideas on that. So now let's talk about the elements of composting. This is, so I had a young person work on this PowerPoint and they did all this fancy stuff for me. I'm just gonna bring it all up. So these are the important elements you need to have a healthy compost pile. So you need air, you need water, you need carbon and nitrogen containing materials. So first we'll talk about water. Moisture is absolutely necessary for the microbes to work. And it's ideal to have moisture about 40 to 60%. If it's too dry, the bugs are going to stop working. And if it's too dry, you're going to want to add water and add green material. If it's too wet, so say you don't have a cover on your compost and you know it rains and it just gets to be a big wet mess, it could go anaerobic, which means it could then get a smell to it. So you want to add browns and you want to turn it and you're going to want to cover it for the next rain so that it doesn't continue to get too wet. When you're setting up your bin, you want to make sure you have access to water. Like, and I believe we'll down there is a slide about where to put your bin, but you want to think about having water close by. So, you know, even if it's just a watering can or a rain barrel or a hose, you want to have access to water. That's one of my problems with my compost bin at City Hall. I don't have access to water. Although I guess I take that back. Last year we did water our garden. So But the first few years I had no water in, and it was tough. I had to lug out jugs of water, and it's a pain in the neck. So the second element is oxygen. So oxygen is critical. It's an aerobic process. You don't want to go anaerobic because then it's going to smell. And this is why you're going to turn your compost. So the turning will add oxygen. It'll break down the material. It'll release the trapped heat. It keeps the smells down. It invigorates the microbe activity. And you want the cooler air at the bottom to circulate up. So when I make a compost, I usually put twigs and wood chips at the bottom. You don't want matted leaves. You don't want matted paper at the bottom because that'll prevent the air from circulating. So no matted newspaper at the bottom. You want to allow for adequate airflow. And so for aerating, you can use a pitchfork or an aerator. If you have any pitchfork will do. I have any pitchfork, but if you need if you're buying a pitchfork or getting one, I would recommend the manure pitchforks which have the rounded tines, the rounded scoop tines, because they work nicely to poke holes in the compost. We also have these aerators. So this, for years I didn't have one of these, and we sell them in our compost bin sale. I'm not recommending it, but I will say it's kind of fun. You just stick it down in the pile. The little wings here go up, and then you twist it and pull it up, and it gets the material all fluffy. So it's just kind of a fun thing. I have to say I get a kick out of it, and it makes it enjoyable, but not necessary. So you need water, you need air, and then you need green material, which is just another way, it is what we call materials high in nitrogen. So these are your food scraps, coffee grounds, grass clippings if they don't have pesticides on them. So that's your green material, and we will talk about that in more detail later. And then you also need brown material, which is the material high in carbon, and that's like leaves and twigs and wood chips, shredded newspaper, straw, that kind of stuff. And those four elements will make your microorganisms happy. So there is a whole food web in your compost pile, and you want the bugs to be there. You want them to be happy. And there's different levels of bugs. It can start with bacteria and fungi, and then move to some of the bigger decomposing bugs, centipedes and worms and beetles. And the bugs, different types of bugs flourish in different stages. But this is a whole science in itself of analyzing the bugs in your pile. But you just want to make them happy so that they will make your compost. Now, the ins and outs of composting. Okay, so the green material, this is the stuff that's rich in nitrogen. And so it can be like vegetable and fruit scraps and peels, breads, pastas, rice and grains, coffee grounds, napkins, paper coffee filters, tea bags, eggshells, and again, the grass clippings, preferably without pesticides on them. And then you want the brown material, which would be the leaves and wood chips, twigs, sawdust, untreated sawdust, straw, shredded paper, and you're going to need lots of brown. So ideally, you might want to have, what I've always had is a pile of leaves or the brown material next to my compost bin, and I draw through it throughout the year. And it's kind of nice to have a mixture because that helps the airflow. You don't want to just have shredded paper in there because that actually can get matted, and you want to mix that with leaves or twigs, just so that the air will flow through the compost pile. Now, lastly, what not to put in a compost. So no cheese, so this is your outdoor compost bin. Now this is different than if you were doing a food waste drop off or anaerobic digestion. So I just want to make that clear. If you're doing an outdoor compost bin, which is what we're talking about and what we want you to do, I would stay away from cheese and dairy, meat and bones. Those attract animals, and it's best not to put them in your bin. They can develop odors, attract animals. No oils, no grease, no peanut butter. You know, a tiny little bit of something will be fine, but as a whole, try to stay away from these items. No painted or treated wood, no diseased plants, and no pet waste because of pathogens, no coal ash, and no grass and pesticides. Preferably have organic grass. If you're not sure of something, I would not put it in. I mean, you can always ask me too. And I will say some of this is trial and error. There are some things that you definitely need to do. You need to have a lot more browns than greens. You need to have water, you need to have air. But I have heard many presentations on composting, and a lot of it, you know, some people feel comfortable with something that somebody else doesn't. So you might get two different answers from somebody on a particular item. You know, should I put orange peels in? Somebody might say yes, and somebody might say no. I say yes. If you're working with worms, you don't want to put citrus in because it is harmful to the worms, but in a regular compost bin, totally fine. But somebody else may say no. So just keep that in mind. A lot of it is just, you know, how you experience things. Don't be scared of it. It's fun, and just kind of go with it. So we can't talk about composting without talking about the carbon to nitrogen ratio. This is important. The microbes need carbon, that brown material, for energy and growth, and they need nitrogen for protein and reproduction. Now they need this in a 30-to-1 ratio, 30 carbon to 1 nitrogen by weight. It's a dry weight basis. So too much nitrogen will make odors. And each item, this is where it gets complicated. Each item can have its own ratio number. So it can kind of be like cooking. Like there's a recipe and there is a lot of science. And if you're a commercial composter, then you're really going to want to follow a certain recipe. But if you're just a backyard composter, my opinion is you don't have to worry about it too much. There is a science to it, but there's also an art to it. And it can vary depending on what is available to you. You don't have to stress out about it. The weight ratio can be complicated. And there's not many people, including myself, that can figure out the weight of these items and how to measure it out. So we have a general rule of thumb. And this goes by volume. For every bucket of green material, you want to use 2 to 3 buckets of browns. I like that. It's simple. I use 3 parts brown to 1 part green, but it could be 2 to 3 parts brown. And the part can be a shovel full, it can be a bucket full, it can be a wheelbarrow full, whatever works for you. The key is that you need a lot more browns than greens. If you just have greens, if you just do a pile of food scraps, it's going to be gross. It's going to be slimy. It's going to smell. That's not going to work. So you definitely want to have the browns. And that's why I usually have like either a garbage can or a wire bin or some kind of container with leaves in it right next to my compost. So every time I add the greens, I can add a bunch of leaves as well. Sometimes I use sawdust. So I've used shredded paper, you know, that list that we went through. Now, you also want to think about how you prepare the materials. Chopping definitely helps. If you increase the surface area, the microbes have more to work on. So it just will take less time if you chop up whatever you're putting in there. You don't have to, though. It's not necessary, but it does make it go faster. You definitely want to remove staples if you can, like from tea bags. If you can remove the staples, that's helpful. And absolutely remove those pesky produce stickers. Those things drive me crazy. Why can they not make those compostable? You know they can, but they don't. So the produce stickers should come out too. Staples should come out. I do find tea bags a little tricky. Sometimes they are plastic. In the composting literature, I don't see a lot of, they don't really talk about that much. They just say tea bags can go in. But if you can't rip it, then I don't put it in. I try not to buy tea like that, but yes. So hot versus cold composting. Passive or cold composting requires little effort and requires little attention, but it is slower, and weed seeds may persist. So if you have cold composting where it doesn't really get hot enough, it might be because you have smaller piles. It might be because it's too dry. The temperature range for the cold piles is usually 70 degrees to 110 Fahrenheit. It just doesn't heat up, and it's okay. It just means the composting will go slow, and it doesn't necessarily kill all the seeds or the pathogens. So you may not want to use that compost in your garden. That's why, and you may want to be a little more careful about what you add. Like, definitely don't add diseased plant material or anything that has seeds. Now, the active or hot composting, the heat is generated as the microbes eat the matter, and that goes through different stages. It goes through a stage up to 70 degrees to about 110, and then 110 to 150. And you really need it to stay around 130 to destroy the pathogens and the weed seeds and insect larvae. Now they do have, and I'm so sorry, I forgot to bring it home with me today. They do have composting thermometers. They're like a thermometer with a really long stick part to it. And you stick that in your compost and you can kind of track your temperature if you're interested. Again, it's totally fine to do it however you want to, but if you really want to try to get a hot compost, you might want to track the temperature. So when the temperature stabilizes, it'll go up and stay up for a while and then come back down. That means that your compost is about ready. So, and we'll talk about that. So setting up your bin, you want to locate it. This is what I'm just going to put all this in. You want to locate it in an area that's easily accessible, where even in the winter, remember in the winter, you don't want to stop composting. You want to be able, you don't want to have to shovel 50 feet to get to your bin. And you want good drainage if possible, easy access from your kitchen and close to water that we talked about. It's best to have some room around it. Critters like clutter, so the less clutter around it, the better. And then set up your storage of browns and have a system for collecting your food scraps and have the tools accessible. When you start your bin, you want to create a 4-inch base of browns, such as twigs or wood chips on the bottom of the bin. Again, don't use the matted newspaper or shredded paper or leaves even. And make sure you have air pockets. You don't want mush on the bottom. And so you have the air circulating. And then there's 2 ways to fill your bin. One is called the lasagna layering method. And that's where you layer your browns and your greens, and you just go through like constantly just layering browns and greens in a layer method. The other way that I use is burying your food scraps. So you have your browns in the bin, and then you dig a hole and put your food scraps in it, and then cover it up and maybe add some more browns. So that's the dig a hole system. It's not very technical, I guess, but either of those systems is fine. The key is you want the greens buried. You don't want them sitting on top. This is a graphic from Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection, and I always liked it, and it might be hard to see. I apologize, but I will send it out with the PDF if you're interested. And it just easily goes over the basics of the browns and greens of the layering method. And they have some good information on their website, the Mass DEP folks. So we talked about the moisture in the bin. You want it 40 to 60% moist in your pile. If it's too dry, it's going to be too slow. If it's too wet, the bugs could drown and you kind of have odors. So they do have the squeeze test to test the moisture, and it should feel like a wrung out sponge. So when you squeeze it, maybe you should have a few drops coming through, but you shouldn't have water pouring out of your hands. And it shouldn't be crinkly where it's so dry. It's pretty simple. And if you're uncomfortable just doing it with your hand, just wear a glove and do it that way. That's a good way to keep track of the moisture of it. So when your compost is done, you want to keep stirring it, and you'll notice that the temperature will go down. And once it's done, you're going to want to cure it for at least 30 days. Oh, sorry, I went too far. You do want to let it set for at least 30 days before it's ready. And you could, and not everybody does let it set, but I do recommend that. You may want to screen it, but you don't have to. And in screening, you'd have to get like, maybe a 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch screen that you could just get the compost to go through, and it'll keep the larger, anything that isn't composted up on top. So you don't, so you can just throw it into your bin as you start a new one. So that's, I guess that's everything I want to say on that slide. And how do you know when your compost is finished? So it should be crumbly and loose. It should be dark brown. It should have an earthy smell to it. And you should not see any food scraps in it or any feedstock in it. And the pile will shrink to about 1/3 of its size. Now, there are a couple tests that you can do to check to make sure that your compost is done. And one of them is the respiration test. You can take a handful of moist compost and put it in a bag, press out the air and seal it, let it sit for 3 days, and then open it and smell it. And if it has an ammonia smell, then it's not ready. But if it just has an earthy smell, then it's ready. And then the other one is the germination test, where you count out seeds and put them on a plate and keep it moist. And then in a few days, you can compare the number of sprouts to the germination rate on the seed packet. Those are for the gardeners. They want to do that. But those are 2 good tests that I actually learned those in our master composting class. I was not aware of those. And then ideas of how to use your compost. So you can incorporate, it is a soil amendment. Remember, it's not soil, it's a soil amendment, and it makes the soil healthier. So you can mix it into your garden bed prior to planting or transplanting. You can use about 1/2 inch of compost mixed onto top 6 inches of soil. You can use it as mulch, and you can use it in potting soil as well. It is extremely healthy for your garden, your plants, your lawns, anything that grows. Now, there are some great resources out there. The internet has a ton of resources on composting, and this is a Connecticut Deep site. They have some good information on composting. The Institute for Local Self-Reliance has some YouTube videos and some great reports, and the US Composting Council as well has some great information. Deep has a video called Spoils to Soil, and it's dated. It's definitely dated, but it's a great video. It has all the good information, basic information that you need to know with, and it demonstrates everything. So that's a great video. You can just go on their site to watch. These are some other social media resources if anybody is into that. The International Composting Awareness Week is coming up in early May, and they have a site. And then Recycle Smart Massachusetts offers some good information. Compost Stew is actually a children's book, but I do like their site. They offer some great information on composting, and the US Composting Council. In Connecticut, there's the Connecticut Composting Alliance. They recently had some great webinars, and their last one is going to be tomorrow that I'm speaking at. But they're all recorded and on their site as well. So some great resources there. Now for the UConn Master Composting Program, they required us to get these two books, the Rodell book of composting and the complete compost gardening book. I don't think you need both of them. And the library, I bet, has them as well if you just want to peruse them. They have a lot of information and are great books. I also used this book, Let It Rot. When I started composting 30 years ago, I read this book and used a lot of the information, and it's very easy to read. It's set up so that it's entertaining and fun, and absolutely loved it. So Let It Rot by Stu Campbell. That was another good resource. Now, if you're interested in the UConn Master Composter Program, this is the contact for them, and I can send that out as well. This is our community compost bin and rain barrel sale. If anybody's interested, you can go on that site and see what's being offered. You have to order by April 22nd, and then there's a pickup in Middletown in Old Saybrook on April 24th. And then we're also doing a composting for our climate poster and video contest. So if you know any young people, this is for children in grades kindergarten through 12. The winning posters, there'll be prizes, but what I think is really cool, the winning posters are going to be made into bus signs and they'll be placed on the MAP buses. So they'll go around Middletown. And then the winning videos will be put on our social media and the city website. So I'm kind of excited about that. And I think, and there's my contact information. So please reach out if you have any questions or anything I can help with composting or recycling. I'm very happy to help with any of those. And I think if there's any questions, I would be happy to try to answer them.
So appreciate everybody staying here. This is a lot of good information. I will send out the slides. So if I have your email, if you had registered with your email, if not, I'll put mine in the chat. You can always reach out to me. Reboot Eco is amazing. So just gonna do a little shout out for them. Amazing store. You can bring containers in and have things refilled. I got dishwashing detergent. I'm still using it. I think I paid $6 and I used my Stubborn Beauty growler to do that. Just saying. So there's a question about, speaking of growlers, Chris asks, can you use spent grains from a brewery in your compost?
Well, I would say, I would imagine you can. I don't, I mean, that would just be like a grain, right? Yeah. So, but again, you may want to do it in moderation. I wouldn't do, you know, I don't know how much there is, but I would just start by putting a little bit in at a time, test it out.
Good answer,
I've never tried that. So
right? Michelle has said she's concerned about mosquitoes. Just if you can speak to that.
So mosquitoes, mosquitoes can be anywhere, first of all, and they're more attracted by water. So with a compost, I have not, I see fruit flies before I see mosquitoes. So as long as your compost isn't puddles of water, which it shouldn't be, you should not have a problem with mosquitoes. Or a unique problem. I mean, if you live in an area that has mosquitoes, then they could be anywhere, but a compost bin will not attract mosquitoes.
Excellent. How about wood ash?
That is a very good question. I knew I was going to get asked that today. So, you know, I actually feel wood ash is a little controversial. So definitely coal ash, you do not want to compost. Wood ash, now I did look this up yesterday because sometimes I forget. And the consensus that I saw was yes, you can compost wood ash, but you want to do it in moderation, like just sprinkle a little bit in. I'm pretty sure when I took the course, they had said not to do wood ash because of its alkalinity, maybe, but when I researched it last night, I just saw you could use it in moderation. So so I knew I was going to get that question too. So again, I feel like that's, and I have watched presentations where some people say yes and some people say no. So I feel that that's something that you know, you can experiment yourself, but you definitely don't want to put too much in. Like, don't take all the ash from your fireplace and dump it in your compost. That's going to be too much. What I saw was that you really just want to sprinkle a little bit on at a time and mix it in with your compost, and then that would be fine. But definitely not coal ash, not grilling stuff. That stuff you can't put in your compost.
Just say no. Okay.
Just say
How
no.
about can compost replace fertilizer on lawns?
Yes, compost can replace fertilizer. Yes, absolutely. That's one of the great things about it.
And I'm just going back through. Oh, there was a question about how to get rid of diseased plants if you can't put them in your compost.
Yeah, so they're a struggle bus. They go in the trash. Now there are different maybe you can, I'm not the expert on this, but I sometimes there are programs, or not programs, there are ways which you can dry them out and then maybe put them in your compost, but I would do some more research on that because I'm not the expert on that. I know with diseased plants, we put them in the trash, and we have not come up with a better solution yet on that one.
And one last question. Oh, there's two more. The tumbler bins, are they better to capture the heat from the sun to cook the compost? That was about the tumbler bins.
Yeah, that's a good question. The thing that if the problem with that is that it could dry the compost out. It could dry your material out. So if it is in the sun, you want to make sure it stays watered and it doesn't get too dry.
I think that's all our questions, actually. Just going back through. Oh, there's a question about blue earth compost, diseased plants for that. Not sure.
No, that's a good question because I have talked to them about that because we do get diseased plants in the city, and you know, if it's just a small amount, then I would say that's okay to put it in a blue earth compost bin, but not a lot. I mean, we get a lot. People do cleanups of invasives or, plants on the side of the road, and it's too much for the anaerobic digester. But if it's a small amount from a home and you have access to a Blue Earth compost bin, then I would say, yeah. But don't load up the bin. Please don't load up the bin. They'll yell at me. So a small amount would be okay.
Great questions, everybody.
Yeah, really good questions.
I think that's all our questions for tonight. I really appreciate everybody coming. Kim, thank you so much. This is awesome information. I can't wait till we can do this in person, but
I know.
for
Me
now,
too.
this is the best that we can hope for. And thank you very much for this amazing information. Kim's contact information is up on the screen. If I have your email, I will send out a copy of the slides. I'm just going to post me in here just in case you're viewing from a family or friend's computer and you would like the slides. You can always just reach out to myself. So thank you so much, Kim. Thank you everybody for coming tonight. And we look forward to the day we can be back in person and maybe see some of those awesome earthworms that you brought last time. That was pretty fun.
That was, yes.
And we'll compost, we'll continually compost. So thank you so much. Have a good night, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Happy composting.